Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this early stage investment panel at the SACS conference. We will jump right into a good discussion on the early stage investment climate in Europe and globally, and we have a bunch of great participants. And I think we'll just go around the table or the Zoom pictures to have everybody introduce themselves. And maybe if we go around this way, that I will take a look at the pictures and start with my co-lead with Bibhash then. So Bibhash, welcome.
Hey, thanks Søren, and thanks to the SACS team for inviting us to the panel. We have assembled a great group of investors from various backgrounds. So hopefully people who are out there listening can benefit out of the discussion that comes out of this. And just a quick note about myself, I'm a principal in the healthcare team at NEA, primarily focused on biotech investments. And over the last 3.5 years, have been pounding the pavement in Europe, given that NEA does not have a physical presence in Europe, trying to get the best European deals possible. We are stage agnostic, geography agnostic, truly, now that we have made at least 4 European investments over the last 3 years. And primarily long-term oriented investors typically tend to put in anywhere from $5 to $20 million to work in a round and then scale that up to $50-60 million per company over its lifetime. And I come from a biopharma transactions background, having worked at AstraZeneca and prior to that J&J in a prior life, and prior to that trained as a scientist. Delighted to be here.
Great, thanks for that intro, Bibhash. Maybe we move on to you, Karen.
Sure. My name is Karen Wagner. I'm with Ysios. Ysios is a venture fund that invests in therapeutic companies in Europe and the US. We have about 350 million under management across 3 funds. Our current fund, which is still fundraising, has a target of about 200 million. We've announced 4 investments from that fund all this year. We consider any modality, any therapeutic area, rare diseases and more prevalent diseases. Most of our investments are early stage, although we do some investment in clinical stage. And very similar to Bibhash, I have some background in corporate BD at Roche and biotech companies, which included Glycart, which many of our listeners will be familiar with, as it was a Swiss company, and also have a scientific background by training.
Great, thank you. And then move on to Michael.
My name is Michael Altorfer. I'm the CEO of the Swiss Biotech Association. As such, we are not investing directly, but I can and will comment in this panel on the general perception of the market from the perspective of the ventures in Switzerland. That foremost, of course, includes biotech companies that develop their own drug or drug portfolio, but some of them also develop base technologies, may develop diagnostics, or even specific services that are venture-based. So with that background, I've been working very early on in research at Roche, later most of my career in biotech in the company Polyfor, building that company from close to scratch to certainly late stage clinical. So I have seen in various roles what biotech companies do, what they need throughout these development stages. And this is the perspective from which I can comment in this panel. Certainly right now, also focusing on sort of a dual perspective, those companies that struggle from side effects of the pandemic and those that benefit or actively contribute to the response to the pandemic.
Thank you. And Thijs, we move to you.
Thanks, Søren. So my name is Thijs. I'm a director in the INKEF capital team. So INKEF is a 500 million fund based out of Amsterdam, investing in Europe in healthcare and technology. So we're a 50% healthcare, 50% technology focused fund. Within healthcare, we focus a lot on biotech, medical devices, and digital health. And we try to have the longer term perspective. So our fund life cycle is 20 years as opposed to the shorter life cycles that you see for some other funds. And I think that enables us to really support founders to search the best value inflection points and not push for liquidity at a moment that is not optimal for the venture. We try to be the first or second institutional investor, so we like to participate in seed and Series A deals. Typically, we invest 15 to 30 million over the lifetime of a company, but we do have the ability to go beyond and really invest in the winners. I think I can give a couple of examples of companies, but this week two of our portfolio companies were in the news. One is Salvia Bioelectronics. So this is an innovative neuromodulation device in the field of chronic migraine. So this was started by the guys that were in Sapiens, and we were particularly excited about this one. And I think another one to mention is Scenic Biotech. So this is more a platform technology where INKEF was a seed investor together with Biogeneration Ventures, and they recently announced a deal with Roche Genentech to further expand part of their pipeline. So it's really exciting to be in the news with two companies this week.
Yeah, congrats, Thijs.
And sorry, by the way, my personal background, I'm a medical doctor, and beyond that, also did research in microvascular complications of diabetes. And after that, was in strategy consulting at BCG prior to joining INKEF.
Great. Lior?
Yeah.
Over to you.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Lior Teitelbaum. I'm the Chief Business Officer for FutuRx. FutuRx is the leading biotech incubator in Israel. FutuRx was created as a partnership between Johnson & Johnson through JJDC, Takeda Ventures, and Orbit Partners. And recently, a couple of months ago, we've also added Bayer's Leaps corporate venture as an investor. Our focus is on venture formation and incubation of biotech and pharma startups. We create new companies based on science, exciting science that we identify around the globe. The companies are created here in Israel and incubated within FutuRx for 3 years. We invest about $3 million per company, trying to push them from the academic translation stage to an inflection point and then follow them on to raise the next significant round of investment. Our model is a very hands-on approach where we are not only an investor and a venture creator, but also taking responsibility for most of the activities that are not the R&D activities of the companies. To date, we've created 21 companies. We've had 4 successful graduates and have raised a total of $250 million as follow-on investments for our companies. We currently have 10 companies in incubation stages and 6 more in inception stages. Indication agnostic, modality agnostic, as long as it's biology or chemistry based. And as for my personal background, so I'm a scientist by training and have been doing this early stage investment venture formation BD in healthcare for the past 16 years now. Some in medtech, some in digital health, but mostly in biotech, always in the intersection of science and innovation.
Great. And Guy?
Hi, everyone. I'm Guy Spiegelman. I lead up the work at Amazon Web Services in Europe, Middle East, and Africa that we do with healthcare and life science startups and the venture community and innovation community that supports those startups. And what that means is bringing the power of the cloud and all the services that go along with the cloud to make sure that startups in healthcare and life sciences are able to be agile and develop faster and quicker and take advantage of some of the really incredible opportunities to do high performance computing, AI, machine learning, and those sort of workloads. And also to take advantage of the data that they're generating or the data they need to access. And so that's what I do every day, speak to startups and help them out, and speak to investors and work with their investors, also those involved with venture formation, to make sure that their startups are getting the best of breed computing. Before that, I was at Amoon, which is a large venture fund in Israel, investing in healthcare and life sciences. And I also was working as sort of leading an entrepreneurship program at the Weizmann Institute, a large Israel's foremost biotech institute in Israel. I led a bunch of accelerators before that and came through an operations background in healthcare and medical device companies.
Great. And Joy, now it comes to you. You're on mute, sorry.
Just the dogs barking in the background, as we were saying in our earlier discussion. My name is Cürten. I'm the head of Accelerator at EIT Health. And at EIT Health, we are supporting not only startups within healthcare, but also contributing to the European ecosystem's growth. What that means is EIT Health is actually a partnership of the industry as well as research organizations and universities. And we are working with 150 of these organizations to tighten the networks within them to allow startups to access these really relevant players in the market, to allow them to access the investors within them. And our job is really to be the glue within the connections within Europe. So we support companies to develop and validate their products within their own market, but also within new and different European markets. We do some investing ourselves, but we support companies to make them investable. So I think that we're really helping to bring the deal flow on the table, not only for biotech, but also for digital health and medtech companies as well. And we're really looking for science that works. And even though that might be a statement that's a little bit simplistic, I think sometimes we forget about that. My background is microbiology and immunology. I'm also a public health professional, and I, prior to EIT Health, was working at a small startup company, as well as Siemens, and in California, where I grew up in Silicon Valley and Los Angeles. I worked at the David Geffen School of Medicine, where actually technology kind of begins to develop, somewhat like how Thijs was saying. These medical professionals and healthcare professionals are really really at the heart of this, and that's why it's great to see everyone here on the call together.
Great. Thanks. My name is Søren. I'll do a very short introduction to Novo Seeds, where I'm the managing partner. So we are basically the early stage investment team in Novo Holdings. And Novo Holdings is a large life science investor. We invest across many different groups, focused on life science. And the role of Novo Seeds is basically to build exciting new biotech companies. We've been at this for more than 10 years, and we have similar numbers, I guess, that FutuRx. We have a portfolio of 20 companies, half of which are clinical stage. Along the way, we have closed a few, and we have sold or exited 4 investments. And all of these companies, if not most of them, has been built out of academic science. So the approach of finding some interesting new data and working with the management team and the founders to come up with the right and appropriate business plan and funding it and building it toward the exit, that's exactly what we like to do. So I'm also looking forward to a very interesting discussion today. And maybe over to you, Bibhash, potentially to ask the first question.
Sure, excellent. So maybe we can do this, setting the stage for the overall environment for seed and early stage investments. Let's understand from each of you how you think about what current market cycle we are in, particularly that in Europe, and to an extent, reflected of the capital markets that the US NASDAQ has been in. And what are the broad brush trends in financing and incubation, company creation incubation that has been going on from your vantage point? Now, to note to the audiences, each of us comes from a very different and unique vantage point. So what you will hear obviously reflects the vantage point that they come from. But therein lies the advantage of this panel, right? The diversity which it represents. So with that background, perhaps, Thijs, you can start us off.
Sure. Thanks, Bibhash. I think, what we see is more earlier stage ideas getting more money, right? So you see basically a concentration of capital around the right ideas. And I think this is something you see globally, but also in Europe, you see the larger seed deals that you haven't seen, I think 5 to 10 years ago, when you basically saw this drip feeding of ideas. And I think that really puts European assets in a different position where you, are no longer bringing something towards a potential pharma acquirer or to the Nasdaq with a really strong data package that really has a strong chance of getting a molecule onto the market. And I think that is different. I think what you also see is culturally, entrepreneurs are no longer being sniffed at. I think one of the things is that in the past, academia in Europe would have this trend that, the best thing to do was stay academic and publish more papers. And I think right now you see a younger generation growing up with PhDs that also look to other sectors with the tech industry moving along that really have that energy to also build their own business. And I think that is something that you can really see and sense around Europe. And I think that's a great opportunity.
Wonderful. Karen, as the other investor on the panel, how do you perceive the world?
So we're based in Spain, and while we invest across Europe and the US, we have a special mission to build a vibrant life sciences sector in Spain. So obviously Spain is being one of the more emerging ecosystems in biotechnology. We're clearly, if you think about market cycles, we're clearly still moving upwards. So more companies are being financed. They are financed by better syndicates, including more international investors, larger rounds going in. We're not yet at the stage where we are recycling successful management teams into new companies. So we still always work with first-time founders, scientific founders that very often continue as CEOs of those companies. Which I recognize is a very different situation from many other places in Europe, and very different to the US. We obviously don't have a functioning public market in many places in Europe, but certainly not in Spain. So in terms of financing, it's obviously a very different situation, and I guess other people will comment more on that. Let me stop here and give other people some points to make.
Thanks, Karen. Maybe Lior, and then I'll come to you, Joy. From just given the vantage points that you sit at in terms of curating early stage science and forming those companies, how has the last several years, and particularly maybe also even the last several months, shaped your viewpoint as to what you get to see in terms of quote unquote buildable companies?
So for us, we've been seeing and we continue to see exciting science, and I can say that COVID hasn't affected that too much because academia continues to generate interesting and exciting ideas. Originally, we started by looking at ideas only coming from Israel, but now we've expanded and we're looking globally, and over 60% of the projects we're looking at come from outside of Israel. And I would say the two major areas that we focus on are novel targets, and there we look for that strong mechanistic hypothesis coming from the researcher and scientist, and we do not want to necessarily need to have a druggable or a drug candidate. That's the things that we would take care of, but we are seeing a flux of interesting targets in areas that used to be less popular. So starting with CNS over the past few years, and we have a large representation of CNS in our portfolio, going on now to cardiovascular, which has become interesting again, rare diseases, obviously, and also oncology, which is also always a big part of our deal flow. And the other thing, and the other type of things that we're looking at, and we're more and more excited about, are platforms which take into account synthetic biology approaches and manipulation of biological systems, whereby, it used to be, and all of us know that the platform was a no-go, shunned upon field. Now, if you have an interesting platform that you can reduce to practice into a therapeutic product as a proof of concept and then expand to more products, that's what everyone is looking for, bundling more IP around that. And we're seeing extremely exciting biology that's inspired by engineering, that's inspired by computational biology, that's inspired by material sciences, that will create novel drugs and novel delivery systems and novel approaches to treat rare diseases and neurodegenerative and oncological diseases, etc. So just to sum up, I think the curation that we do is first and foremost on the mechanistic side and on the platform rationale. The execution towards a drug candidate, that's where we come in, and that will be our job. That's not the sourcing part, but that's the execution part that we will take upon ourselves.
Thank you, Lior. How about you, Joy? Once again, unique vantage point. What are the sort of the broad trends in the market that impact your deal flow, and what are you seeing?
Sure, thank you. So one thing that was just being discussed is, prior to this, we were talking about, drip feeding and how some of the investment rounds in Europe have been a bit lower. And I would just like to comment that, as investors, perhaps, we are more willing to offer companies larger rounds. But what we are seeing within the accelerator is that many companies are actually a little bit intimidated to ask for as much as they need to. And this is a pattern that we see at EITL a lot because in our role as kind of a support network, a good friend or an advisor on the shoulder, we are suggesting that startups really think about their milestones and their need for money in a different way. And see the process of raising money as challenging as it actually can be. I think in that sense, companies have often totally underestimate the amount of time that they need to raise these large rounds or even smaller rounds at all. But in the past few weeks, you'd asked what we'd been seeing, and we have launched an instrument called the Startup Rescue Instrument that is actually meant to support companies with capital injection during the period of the crisis. And the European Commission and EIT, which is basically our mother company, has allowed a 60 million euro fund to be distributed across the other KICs, that at which EIT Health is one of. So EIT Health is just one of several different communities that work on technologies within Europe supporting climate, energy, as well as food technology developments. And these 60 million were used to actually support companies that were suffering to find the cash at that moment. And as an investment professional in this case, what we were looking for was actually companies with a immediate need. And sometimes that doesn't mean that it's the unicorn company, but maybe the company that after this capital injection will have a much better chance of surviving and then growing and thriving as well. So that's something that we've seen just in the past few months, and happy to say we've signed off on about 10 of these investments now. So
very, very interesting. Thank you, Joy. Now, Michael and Guy, you also come from, once again, very different vantage points. So perhaps I'll start with you, Guy. In once again, broader trends in the market and what do you get to see?
Yeah, so I want to pick up a little bit about Lior said about platform plays, because a lot of that is based on computational work. And I think what we saw in the early days was some incredible computational biology, chemistry platforms trying to exist as a service business, and then realizing they actually needed to develop a clinical pathway to actually make a return. But we're seeing a swing back, if you like. I think Lior kind of touched on this, where there are some successful platform players that actually can make it as a platform. And it ties into a broader, I think, digital disruption of the sort of, the whole value chain and what we call data-driven biotech. So we're dealing a lot here with the sort of discovery phase and maybe the development phase, but there's also incredible opportunity around disrupting pharmacy manufacturing. and what AI and machine learning can do for things like fermentation, for example. I've seen startups in that area. And I think what we're seeing is investors who traditionally were like, okay, let's get a molecule, let's develop it, let's put it in the clinic, are saying, hold on, I've got a lot of expertise in this industry. Maybe I can broaden my scope and look at not just, okay, here's a candidate, here's a target, you know, but how am I going to disrupt and how am I going to serve the big pharma in disrupting how they do everything from management of clinical trials to how they're doing manufacturing and delivery and commercialization. So I think it's a very exciting time for digital disruption in the industry, and investors, I think, have more opportunity than they once thought.
Very, very, very pertinent. And once again, it can only be achieved from your vantage point, right? Of having seen that spectrum. And likewise, you know, Michael, coming from the Swiss Biotech Association, it's the common platform, right? So same question, how do you see the world?
Well, first of all, addressing the question of the investment cycle, we have seen already since about 3 years a strong uptick of investments into biotech, primarily from outside of Switzerland. So we're talking an average of about 1.5 billion Swiss francs per year that have been funneled and provided to roughly 300 to 400 companies that are active in this field here in Switzerland. And it has certainly been a positive surprise to see that actually the first half of 2020 seamlessly connected with those 3 preceding years. In fact, the first half year has actually been another record half year. And that was quite broadly based. It included a stunning IPO, not in Switzerland, but at the New York Stock Exchange by ADC Therapeutics. It included a number of private companies, private financing rounds, which typically in Switzerland can be quite large. It is actually a rare event, and we have not seen any IPO in Switzerland this year yet. And last but not least, we've also seen a number of collaborations between biotech companies and pharma companies, which really have shown a very robust industry. But I've been cautioning many stakeholders that all of this activity, in particular during the pandemic in the second quarter, as positive a surprise it may have been, all these transactions have really been based on data accomplished and collected prior to the pandemic. So I think we have to be careful in expecting that this will just be continuing in the second half. It's really the prime question for me, to what extent the delays that all the biotech companies have encountered, whether it's been preclinical CRO work or most notably in the clinical setting, to what extent that will affect our industry in the second half of this year, because these delays will now become visible. We will have companies that will be in active discussions for refinancing without having data in their hands, for good reasons, easy to explain, but still it will be important to see how that will be viewed by the investors, which in general I feel exhibit a very, very positive investment perspective and risk appetite. If there is nice data, if there is a compelling business case, not only have we seen fairly rapid closing of financing rounds, but actually also at very, very good valuations as well. So that's a bit the picture on the side of investments overall. A growing number of international investors that are active in Switzerland as a encouraging trend. Of course, we welcome investments from all over the world. With regard to the focus of these investments, there are a few things that stick out, and some have already been mentioned, in particular the AI and real-world data and the role of this type of data and approaches to accelerate or reduce the cost of clinical trials certainly is one trend that is visible. We see a lot of activity also related to the general topic of aging. And last but not least, we've also seen a number of companies now focusing on microbiome, which is still poorly understood, but definitely is a topic that attracts more and more interest.
Excellent. Well, fantastic summary. I think, what's coming across here, just to summarize for everyone, I think is that there is enormous enthusiasm and perception of need for curating early stage science, which continues to emerge. There are specific groups that do, including Søren's group, Lior's group, etc., INKEF, which do a fantastic job of company formation and building out initial companies, and then investors like Karen's group and others in Europe are increasingly becoming more bold and thinking through, and very importantly having the capital wherewithal to support these companies throughout its life cycle. That's excellent. Maybe I can start with the next question and then hand over to Søren to augment further on those questions. So, what each of you perhaps can shed light on is, process and examples of early scientific curation that you have done in company formation. How do we go from getting new science from academic institutions, let's say, to building a drug and forming a company around it? And what are the sort of couple of lessons learned around those? So perhaps we can start with you, Karen, and then roll over.
Okay. We've done a couple of, every fund we do a couple of seed stage investments, and just as a couple of recent examples, one is a company called ONA Therapeutics in Barcelona, which recently raised a 30 million round. And another recent investment we've announced is into Splice Bio, another company in Barcelona. The amount is undisclosed, but it's much less significant. These two suffice perhaps as examples. Basically, we can seed both platforms or single assets. The science needs to be really disruptive, and I mean really, because every pitch, right? The science is disruptive, but it needs to be really addressing unmet need, being differentiated. We do build teams, but the key scientist needs to be deeply involved and committed, and this is one of the core assets, because we always build around science. We believe in seed stage investments. The key investors need to be local, because, as I said before, we don't have teams with business experience. ONA is actually an example to the contrary, because the CEO of ONA had experience working at Uplinks in Belgium. So this is why that founder managed to raise a very large seed and Series A round. So I think the difference in raising a small C round of a couple of million or raising a Series A type 30 to 40 million round, the difference for me is the risk that the killer experiments will be negative early on, and the quality of the team, in particular the business experience of the team. So how do we build companies from science? There's always, unfortunately, a couple of killer experiments which you can go back to those academic founders and say, do that, and they never get it done before you finance that in a company. So you have to somehow set this up as a company and finance it. And the issue is, of course, if those killer experiments are negative within 6 months, then it's not really good for anyone, right? It's a write-off for investors. It's not a good PR story. And in particular for the team that has perhaps left academia or left other opportunities they had to focus on this, it's very disappointing. And it may not fly in the first place because they may not be willing to take the risk. So it's that really difficult first bit is how can you design those killer experiments such that it leaves you a plan B. I think, and that's obviously much easier in platforms than in single assets.
Very pertinent point. Thijs, your view on this?
Yeah, I think, very much aligned with what Karen is saying, but I think in the end, we really look for differentiation. And I think it's also important, we look at great science that translates. So that means that you don't necessarily have to have the perfect data set that proves that this is going to be clinically, or more importantly, commercially meaningful. I think it's more important to really have a founder with a clear idea, with a hypothesis, and a plan to really execute on that. And I think, obviously it's a bonus if people on the team have experience and have done this before, because you're gonna find teams that are benefiting from, we've done this before, we've pivoted, and we found a solution. And that necessarily does not mean that every single founder should have that, but we try to look for teams that bring that experience on board. So perhaps it's a board that provides that experience. Perhaps it's advisors to the company that can bring that experience on board. But I do think it's important. And I think a great example of that is the deal I just mentioned. So Solvia Bioelectronics. So this was started by the former Sapiens team, and they really identified migraines as a key unmet need, but also a place where neurostim could play an important role. And I think, having people that have done this before, but also identifying the unmet needs, looking at it commercially, because this is not an easy market where there is no standard of care. And I think there have been some new drugs hitting the market. So it's really important that you think about that niche up front, think about how you get there, and think about how you differentiate yourself. And I think the team nailed that, and that's why they got their 26 million Series A, where INKEF jumped in. So I think that's a great example. Other than that, fully support Karen's hypothesis or thesis that you need to have local people on the ground that can help. And I like to work with Ysios in Spain. I like to work with Søren in the Nordics, and I hope that others like to work with INKEF in the Benelux area. And I think that way you really have somebody that's close to the team that can support them. And I think that's an important feat as well.
Yeah. Thanks, Thijs. I think I can mention one particular case that we worked on, sort of on the curation side, where we had some very exciting biology. It was a team that is working on some glycobiology, and they had very cool systems set up for identifying targets, and they had found interesting biology around PCSK9, which is a really well-validated target, and they had various targeting modalities, peptides, antibodies, potentially small molecules. And I think it was super exciting. And the company has gone on to raise a quite large Series A round with great investors around the table. And I think the discussion where we spent most time was basically saying that in this space, if you want to be differentiated on PCSK9, you need to have an oral molecule. And we basically, on our dime, funded some experiments to generate an early stage proof of concept that the tools they had at hand and the scaffold that they had looked at could deliver that. And on the back of that data, we sort of went out and tried to fundraise, which we did successfully. And I think that is this marrying the good science with a good positioning that's truly differentiated in a commercial setting is I think one of the roles of the early stage investors. And I think with that, maybe a bit of a transition to the next question that is very much on our mind is getting then the right team around these early stage investment ideas.
Can I just jump in just on the last point?
Sure, Guy.
So everyone talked about differentiated, and I think that's a really key word. I want to talk about undifferentiated. And what do I mean by that? Because we see a lot of teams, unfortunately, doing the same thing when they could, and it's undifferentiated, okay? When they could be using external sources and going much faster in their really cool differentiated stuff. And I bring this in the form of within the context of venture creation, because we've done a lot of work with some venture creation firms in the US, and we'd love to do some more in EMEA now. Third Rock Ventures, if people are familiar, who'd set up these platforms so that the startups don't do anything that's undifferentiated. That's all delivered to them. Okay, and in our case, it's all the computational biotech blueprint that we've specially developed for Third Rock, so that your data room in the cloud, it's all set up already. You don't need to think about that. Okay, and so you can move faster and getting your science to work for you, because the DevOps side and the high performance computing side and the AI machine learning side, that's already kind of been done. And so what I would like to suggest to the audience and to the panel of investors and startups, don't waste time on stuff that's already been done. Okay, it's there, it's available. Use it as a service and move on. So this is a little plug for where the undifferentiated can actually help you.
I think that's very good advice, Guy. And I think from our perspective, that's where a lot of these new technologies with AI and machine learning plays a critical role in the early stage drug discovery, where you can basically potentially for less money come to a sort of a killer experiment with a small molecule, for instance.
Right.
Don't build it yourself, but
interrupted there. So
yeah. Good.
Well, since we are at the topic, Søren, if I may take like 15 seconds. So another example came from Thijs, what Thijs mentioned and Søren mentioned, which I think will be remiss if not to bring up here, is, you know, a group like Bioinnovation Institute. Søren's intimately familiar given Novo's involvement there. But that's an example of where I think what I call institutionalized curation of science. There is a extremely well adapted sourcing mechanism for getting academic science, and then BII, I think, has been doing and in the future will continue to do very pertinent work in sort of shaping that science into an individual drug development projects, bringing people, capital, as well as human capital, financial capital, as well as scientific capital sort of merged into one platform. So whenever investors like us who want to invest in these companies go and see the level of curation and the level of sophistication that comes up, it's just in a different plane. And that makes it much easier in terms of credibility and, you know, just the people around the table and the quality of science around the table. The decision to invest and invest significant sums of money much easier.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Very much agree, Bibhash. And I think, but I think what is also important if you want to go out and raise that amount of money is that the team that is behind the project is credible and have experience and done it before. I think it touches upon your comment, Karen, that you need good management teams to administer that kind of money. And I think Lior, you had some good comments on how you do it and in these early stage processes.
Sure. So one of the things that we focus on is, and I'm carrying on Guy's notions here, is to do the replicative stuff easy and coming from our incubator to each one of our companies. So how to develop a small molecule drug, the steps are relatively the same steps. The CROs are the same CROs. Now it's just applying it to this different target or that different target. And those are, again, as I mentioned before, those are the things that the incubator, FutuRx in our case, brings into the play. So when we create a new company, first and foremost, the thing that's important for us is to understand what do we actually have in hand and what came from the academic group. And that's why we will never have a professor as a CEO, and we'll never have an academic who moonlights as an executive in the company. And we also typically do not have founders for the company, because what we're looking for executors are people who will do the R&D work and take this company through its inflection points. So after tech transfer, we will typically repeat all of the major studies done by the PI to make sure they repeat in our hands. And then we will go into the motions and the steps that we will do for a small molecule type of product, for a biomolecule type product, etc., we work with a group of CROs, which all of us know, and we have our standard way of working with them. But again, I think one of the most important things that we do, and that's different, is we from other groups, is we do not appoint a CEO at this point. We really do assemble a team of scientists with the academic background that's relevant for this project, and with the experience and expertise from industry of doing hands-on development work and also managing it, so that they will do the day-to-day R&D and receive all of the other support from the incubator management team and from our partners. So we can pull in the medchem experts from J&J, or the rare disease experts from Takeda, or one of our SAB members who's an especially well-renowned neurodegenerative person and an expert. So they will work with us on assembling the development plan, and then when the company kicks in, start working immediately in the lab that's already ready, and go through the motions of the development plan. Now, once we do that and invest all of the capital in the R&D work and not invest it in hiring a BD person and a CFO and a CEO, and designing, as Karen mentioned, the killer experiments, we can really quickly kill the project if it's not what we wanted or expected it to be. And since we don't have that, I would say, emotional connection to it from the academic inventor, then we can always take the team if it's good to the next project, but don't keep the project as a living dead project if it's not worth keeping alive.
And how do you then go about, once you, let's say you have a good molecule and a good plan, how do you find the management team then?
So for the management team during incubation, we have a huge Rolodex. I would say every scientist in Israel, or every Israeli scientist that wants to come back to Israel has sent us their CV over the past few years. And we really and very thoroughly interview them, because they know that this is a school. This is a place where you learn from experienced drug developers, and you will then know how to do drug development. And we see our veteran CSOs getting very nice positions in industry in Israel and globally. And then when we want to raise the next round, we will either get a more prominent person to lead it and then become a CEO, or we will raise the round and then if the CSO rises to the part, make them the CEO, or hire a CEO. We always will apply or try to have a experienced industry veteran as a director or a chairman to support and give mentorship to the company beyond the mentorship that we can offer.
Okay, I think at least from our experience with all the money coming in and good companies getting a lot of financing, I think to attract a really good and experienced CEO is not enough to have good data in the company. You also need to be well funded and a good investor base, because that is what is important for a CEO, that you can that you don't have to spend your time raising money. You can actually run the company. And maybe Thijs and Michael, you also live in areas where talent is available for the Series A and B rounds. So maybe comment on that. You first, Thijs. What you look for?
Sure. So I don't know. Talent is always scarce. I would say on my end, because we're always looking for great people, and I envy Michael with his Swiss-based biotech and pharma background, because I do think that you have a great ecosystem over there. So I don't know. I think what we look for in talent is something that I talked about earlier, and I think it's all about thinking the right team and building a team that complements each other. And I think sometimes that can be a younger founder that is very strong and wants to develop him or herself and really be coachable by this more experienced board that can guide somebody to make the right decisions and be a mentor for that person. I do think that in itself is also something we need to do in Europe, because I think talent is not as abundant in places like Boston, where it's one biotech team and everybody's on their second or third or fourth stint. And I think you need to figure out how to do this in a different way. And I do think it's also the beauty of our ecosystem that you can do it in this way. I think besides that, what we really look for is founders that have a plan and think with an hypothesis, and not just think about, I need to get to the next step and then I'll see. I think it's all about, when all of this is a success and we will ring the bell on NASDAQ, this is where we aim to go for. And yes, that will change over time. But I do think it's important to have that vision and work towards that. I think that is a key thing we'd like to see. Other than that, I think translational experience is something that is really important in early stage companies. And that is something, if you have experience, it adds a lot of value. And that's why Lior's model is also very interesting, that you do bring that experience on board with your accelerator.
Okay. And maybe a comment from you, Michael, with a big network of pharma companies in Switzerland and their surroundings. Do you have the talent you need to run the biotech companies that are getting funded?
Absolutely. It is a strong hub, but at the same time, if we do look at what is actually missing most, I'm still coming back to talents again. And if we're talking talents, it's not just specialized scientists, but it's foremost also, I don't know who knows the two prime examples, which is Jean-Paul and Martin Glosel, who have built up Actelion. I always say we should have many more of this type of leaders in biotech. The biotech industry has grown so much and is such a stronghold in this fairly small country that there's no question we have no chance to educate and bring up sufficient talents ourselves. And that is why it's very important that Switzerland also has a strong image to be open for international talent, and it is attractive for international talent. But nevertheless, it's still the most scarce resource we have, more than money and more than technology access. That's one thing. In terms of support for the startups, there really has been the advantage that we've been able to build this industry since 30, 40, 50 years. And in the course of this long history, there has also been an emergence of a very strong platform for startups. Startups do get support both for the undifferentiating as well as for the differentiating support they need for their respective activity. It starts from inside of the universities, where you have groups that prepare professors or scientists that want to make a spin out for that step through active support and advice. It is then supported through a plethora of foundations and other organizations that are active with competitions, with very early seed financing, that have proven that they can really help companies to be competitive and effective from the beginning. It is then added with support and also various ways of education in this field from InnoSwiss, which is supporting the public-private partnership approach. You probably all know that Switzerland is not known for direct investments by the government into biotech companies. The startup scene here is almost exclusively run by public-private partnership funding and nothing else. And last but not least, it is the very important role of the investors that then help either through participation in the board or through advisory to provide the more differentiating knowledge.
Thank you, Michael. I'm cutting you a little bit short because we want to go to the last question round here. So sure. Maybe a quick comment for you, Bibhash, on how you, from a US perspective, look at the good teams, and then over to you for the final round of questions.
Sure. So 30 seconds on that. We do not invest in European companies unless it has been curated and invested in by a local investor. who know the ecosystem well, and who can attract and build talent within the organization. Talent is absolutely the key. And from that perspective, we look globally. We do not believe that there is anything like a Dutch company or a Danish company or a Swiss company. Every company is global, and therefore should be able to attract talent globally and ultimately do business globally. So preparing companies to that end is important part of personnel decision making. So with that, maybe we have 5 minutes, so maybe 1 minute per panelist. How do we think about the ecosystem in Europe? And from the perspective of what are the key regions, based on, once again, where each of you are, and what are the key ingredients that have made those regions successful? Maybe just highlight 1 or 2 key for each of those buckets. And Michael, given your unique role in the Swiss ecosystem, I'll start with you, followed by you, Joy.
So I'll try to be short. We are watching very carefully the discussion between the UK and the European Union, naturally for 2 reasons. First of all, potentially it's a new partner, but it's also potentially a new competitor in the space. We need to find out how that evolves. And of course, the negotiation between the UK and the EU may also give us a hint how the relationship between Switzerland and the EU may evolve going forward. With regards to the centers, we see a strong development in Spain, in Benelux and the Nordics. We have consistently been working with companies in Germany, France, and the neighboring countries in general. But that's what the great picture looks like from my perspective.
Bibhash, I think you were on mute, but I know that you had mentioned you would have me speak next, and I would have to say that Michael's observations are my observations as well. As EIT Health, we do represent Europe as a whole. So we are very excited to see some of the less represented regions from the Eastern European side, or even Portugal, kind of raising in terms of their innovation and their perspectives on the market. What I do want to mention, which has not only to do with the ecosystems in Europe, but also with the element of teams that we were discussing, was that we see that it really takes a village to raise a startup. The teams in the classic sense are no longer just in one country, and you're looking for experts that will provide you some differentiated and undifferentiated knowledge from that side as well. And the programs that we have, like Bridgehead, that help startups connect with each other so that they are able to manage their reimbursements or the regulation processes, or within our Gold Track program, where we take seasoned experts from the venture capital space, from the US, from the Boston ecosystem. We see this complex interaction between the regions that ends up really strengthening the companies, and that when they internationalize early, they're able to attract a lot of attention and really have the capacity to succeed. So that's what we're seeing.
Excellent, thank you. Lior, how about you?
Yeah, so I think we've seen a nice development in the talent pool in Israel, and from my personal view, I think the talent pool in life sciences in Israel has been too much US oriented over the past few years, and we want to see much more EU collaboration. So we see funding coming in from the EU. EIT has just opened their hub in Israel last year, and we were actively working with EIT Health, like me personally, and groups in Israel. And we see more and more collaborations with European-based investors. And I think there's much more similarity in the culture and in the development stages between scientific minds in Israel and in Europe than there are in the US. And I think also the geographic proximity can share that, can help that. So So we are sourcing more from Europe, and we want to see more and more involvement from European-based investors and European-based pharma and innovation centers in Israel and incubators. And we want to see more of our companies maturing into presence in Europe and the large talent pools in Europe, and not necessarily just Boston and San Francisco.
Thank you. Karen, and then Thijs.
Obviously, I believe that the ecosystem in Spain is fantastic, and I'll keep it really short. So, of course, number one, the science is top-notch. It's quite a large country with a lot of very good academic groups. Translational science is also very good. We've got a lot of very good clinics, key opinion leaders across many fields that practice in Spain. And last but not least, it's about 1/3 of the cost in terms of salaries and lab space if you compare it to Switzerland. And let's not talk about Boston. It's really cost effective. It doesn't, obviously, if you can raise more money, it doesn't matter. But particularly in seed stage, I think given the culture in Spain as well, you don't need to own everything. You can ask your friends. It's a very cost-effective system to get killer experiments done.
Yeah, I think also keeping it short, I think Amsterdam has lots of investors, I think, that have particularly sizable funds. So I think that's our main advantage. I think there's also some experience and some later stage listed biotech companies like Galapagos, like GenMap, but also in the Belgian ecosystem. And I do think that helps to build a talent pool that also is interested in building something for themselves after having a couple of years at those institutions. I think finally, Amsterdam is now the seat of the EMA, so that also attracts some bigger pharma companies to open up shop in Amsterdam. So that definitely helps. But at the same time, talent always remains scarce, and we can learn from other ecosystems. So we see some good trends, but we're still building.
30 seconds for Guy before we wrap this up.
So my only comment is the new sources of talent and on the computational side. So we've seen some great stuff come out of the Barcelona High Performance Computing Center that is now affecting the life sciences. And I think, so it's not a geographic, if you like, but it's more like, wow, we're going to be sourcing some ideas and great science from a different space, if you like. And I think that's where it's going to get really exciting. And in EMEA, we're playing catch up. They got this in Boston and in Stanford a long time ago. So let's get to it.
Excellent. So with that very ebullient positive note, I think we wanted to convey the main points we wanted to convey is give the audience a snapshot of where the European ecosystem is, what the current sort of broad trends in early stage company investing are, and what, according to the panelists, each of whom see the world from a different vantage point, what the critical elements are. Hopefully that got communicated to the audience. Søren, any final words to sort of sum up?
No, I think it was a great discussion, and I think I enjoyed the points from everybody. So it shows how many approaches there are to building companies, and just if you're listening out there, so we as from this side of the table are very dependent on the founders and the innovators, and look forward to work with you in the future of building great new companies.
Indeed, indeed. So with that, thanks once again to the organizers and the people who tuned in. Thanks for participating.
Thanks for having us.
Have a good day.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.